You want to make a point, don't you? Well, I haven't. And there's some figures to prove it. There's the same figures from Hungary, Poland and Greece. And that is months inflation in percentage. Wouldn't you have loved to have been in Hungary? I mean, what do you do? What are you going to do about that when you go there next week? And I've heard stories of the Weimar Republic is the obvious one in Germany, where people were buying, you know, in a cafe, and you buy a cup of coffee and you go order a second cup and you can't afford it because it's gone up while you've sat there drinking the first cup of coffee. I have no idea whether they're true, but if it's going up that much per month, you've got to accept that over 10 minutes, 20 minutes, it's going up so much, you can't afford something 20 minutes later. And, you know, these aren't isolated cases. You know, it happens around the world to all economies that are based on paper money, because at the end of the day, it's just paper, and you keep going. You know, it isn't that isolated. There are loads, and I can keep going. You know, I've got to move the screen across to keep it. There are all economies based on paper end. And I have a feeling that ours might not be that far away, however they choose to end it. Whether they choose to knock off some zeros, change what we're using, or just let it fail completely, which, let's face it, they're not going to do because they'd lose out. So they're going to find a way, but the money you know in your pocket in some fundamental way will change. And guess what? The money they give you for the money in your pocket won't buy quite as much of what you were buying in the first place. And that could be quite a significant jump. Now, there's, you know, some of them you'll have heard of, some of them you won't. You know, there's some pretty big ones there, but let's face it, it's not just the small countries. It's happened in the US before. You know, who remembers the Confederate dollar? Don't have it anymore. Because it failed and they moved on to another currency, you know. So which country am I going to pick on for hyperinflation? I mean, there's a big one. Everyone knows about it. And the prize is $50 trillion to anyone that guesses which country I'm going to pick on. Heard it here first. That's $50 trillion I owe you. So there you are. And that is a $50 trillion note, people. Congratulations. There you are. You're now a very, very rich man. If only it was worth anything. But unfortunately, it's paper, but actually real printed monetary paper. So yes, Zimbabwe, our favourites for hyperinflation when we're trying to explain it. What is that number? And that's the first number, 10 to the 21. I didn't know what 10 to 108 was, and I couldn't find it out. So I can't give it sextillion. I can't tell you what it is, because there isn't a number invented to tell you what that number is. It doesn't exist. You know, there are numbers like that, when you have to write times 10 to the base of anything, you know you're talking about a meaningless number that means nothing to anybody. How do you work that out? What does that mean to you in daily terms? So I'm going to do it. If you've got January the 1st, or whatever the date is, you know, take today's date. Say your mortgage payment this month is £400. So what would it be worth if you're in one of those economies? What would you have to pay this time for your mortgage payment next year for this month? Again, guess what? There isn't a word for it. But that's how much you'd have to pay for the same £400, assuming that amount of interest. Do you think you're keeping your house for even 1 month during hyperinflation? Rent or outright buy. If you own a house and you have a mortgage and we go into hyperinflation, that's what theoretically could happen, and that is based on Zimbabwe, because we love Zimbabwe. Great figures. But what the hell's that figure? I mean, what do? You know, how do you do it? And it's true, you have to start printing notes again. And you have to get rid of the notes you have and print like these. That is an actual $100 trillion note. But what's it worth? You know, at the end of the day, when the economy goes up that much, and that's your mortgage payment, what's 100 trillion worth? Well, actually, at the end of the economy, it was worth that. I could buy 3 eggs. $100 trillion was worth 3 eggs when the economy collapsed.
Sorry, could you explain that again? You got £400 to pay each month for your mortgage?
Yeah, for example, say it was a recurring £400 a month. Right. If you were in an economy...
Why should it turn into that amount?
Well, assuming you're not on a fixed rate, assuming it's based on the rate of inflation, which obviously is set by the government, and they're going to keep it going up, so you have to pay.
If there's hyperinflation, then there's
yeah, I'm using this as a basis, just so you've got, because, you know, these numbers here, let's face it, they're totally meaningless to everybody here. So I was trying to make it as an example that you could understand for, you know, something that may go on in your life, and then you can relate to how much that would be to you to try and pay that off.
So
It's just impossible.
So the interest rates go zooming up?
Everything. Everything. At the end of the day, that's inflation. Everything's based around inflation. I mean, that's what the RPI is, isn't it? Retail Price Index. It's a basket of things that they basically chuck everything out of that moves. That's how the government does it.
I thought I heard about some people in Zimbabwe that bought houses with mortgages and they paid them off really quickly because of this.
If you know it's coming and you can fix, so if you're on a fixed rate, then effectively, if that's the price of your next door neighbour's mortgage but you're still paying the fixed rate, then what do you care? 400 quid's not even an egg to you. It's nothing. You wouldn't even wipe your bum with it. But, so if you can do that and you know when it's coming, and God, I wish I could tell you today when it's coming, but I can't, sorry. It's not because I don't. Yeah.
If you got a mortgage to fix.
Yeah, if you can fix it over the length of term and you know it's coming in that term. But at the end of the day, you will find that mortgages, along with everything else, they change the laws, they change the clauses. If they think they're going to lose, they will just change the rules. And there is nothing you can do about it. How can you make gold ownership illegal when it's just a substance? It's like making an arm illegal. You can't. It's a naturally occurring thing. But if they say it, what are you going to do to fight them? Because they control the police. They control the army. Can't fight them. So at the end of the day, yes, that is theoretically a wonderful solution, but you've got to be a bit wary that, if they find too many people doing it, and let's face it, we're in an age of information technology. So there are a lot more people out there who are starting to protect their assets and know what's going on in the system. But if they find that it's too many people, they'll just change the law somehow to counteract that. So we'll come on to that with the gold and how you buy it. So sticking with the recent economy, you might have thought I was being stupid, picking on Zimbabwe because it's the great one, it's the big one that everybody knows. But there's the Weimar Republic, a 10 billion note. And it is milliard, not million, so it is billion. Yeah? And you think I'm picking on Zimbabwe? Try this one for a laugh. 100 million billion note. Yes, that's what they had to do to be able to go shopping. They had to produce 100 million billion note. And that is a copy of a real note. I don't have one because you can't get them for love nor money. Not surprised. I'd love to buy one if I could afford it. But it really is that bad. When it goes through the roof, it's an exponential curve. It keeps on going, and there's nothing you can do about it unless you've protected yourself before it happens. So the M3 money supply was a chart that Marcus shows on. And what happened to all these economies? Hyperinflation was caused by the printing of money. We all know that. That's what quantitative easing is all about. And as you know from the graph that you've already seen once today, that is really what they've done. And the problem is that was, I can't remember if it was 2008 or 2009. That was 2009. There isn't one for 2010 because guess what? They didn't produce it in 2010. Probably because they couldn't fit it on that scale. I have no idea why, but they didn't produce it in 2010, so I can't show you that one. But and then if we come into our current economy, what's all this causing? Well, you've seen Egypt. Is it because they're pissed off with some guy that's been in government for too long? Well, no, because let's face it, if he was in government for that long, maybe he's good at it, maybe they like him, but clearly they don't for whatever reasons. But, is Egypt an isolated thing? Have there been problems? Well, I'll suggest, Romania, there were riots in the 19th of May. They were not on the BBC News. But if you do your research, they were there, and I happen to have a flat in Romania, so I do know that they really were there, because I've got photos and videos of it in Bucharest, so I know they happened. And that was because they said, right, 25% public sector wage cut, and people went, well, hang on, I'm just breaking even, so I can afford the petrol to get to work and the food to feed my family. So you take out 25%, I can either not go to work, in which case I've got nothing, or I can not feed my family. What are you going to do about it? Well, you're obviously going to have a bit of a problem. Portugal, freeze on public sector wages. France, 3-year freeze. Greater than 10% unemployment. And bearing in mind these are the figures that they produce, so I would suggest that they're probably slightly understated, and I'll come into that in a second. As I said, I'll come on to unemployment. And greater than 70% debt to GDP. Now again, Ireland, you all saw that on the news. 12th of May of last year in Dublin, protests. Why? Because they were reducing benefits, because they had public sector wage cuts. Exactly the same story again. And here we have Germany, and here we have Bulgaria. Oh, and guess what? In Greece, 4th of May last year, and then in Spain, the 5th of February, in Latvia. How many proofs do you need? I mean, okay, Britain's a pretty darn lazy country at the end of the day, and we're fairly wealthy comparatively. But how much is it going to take before we start getting up there? How long do you think it's going to be before we're sat in the streets shouting at someone? And, well, I hope it goes nowhere near Egypt because, as you know, there's been actual deaths there. That's how bad that's getting.
The weather gets better.
Yeah, well, yeah. When it's not so cold, I'll get out then. I don't like it. But, here's where the EU. You know, we're all pretty much in the EU now. Some countries they've let in slightly, like Romania is not a full EU member yet. You may have thought it was. It wasn't, even though it came in 2001. It's still not considered a full EU member because it doesn't meet these targets. Well, as I've just shown you, no one in the EU does. So why the hell should they? You know, what's the matter with them? The average EU debt is actually 8.8% government debt when you're not allowed above 3. Now, okay, we're better off there than the US at 10, but actually, Britain, we're not. We're 12%. We're actually the next one under Greece, who were at 13.7 at last count. We're second place. We are one of the worst off in the entire EU compared to Latvia, compared to any of those countries. We have a worse economy and worse debt.
But aren't the cuts sort of aiming to bring that percentage down?
They are, but what was their last cut? They said they were going to save 400 billion on a 1 trillion deficit, but they're going to do it in 10 years. So in 10 years, it's going to be 20 trillion, and they're going to have saved 0.4 by the time we get there. Great. All of these cuts will account for nothing in the grand scheme of things because they're based on long-term periods with an increasing debt structure. So if we've already got over $1 trillion of debt and they're saying we're going to reduce it by 400 billion, you think, all right, that's 40%, it's not bad. But it's 40% over 10 years, by which case, at the current rate of inflation, will be over 10 trillion. So then it's not even 4%. So you've got to look at these things in time scales, which sometimes people miss. It's easy to put two figures together and not realise that they're based around two different time scales. So I would say that they're, a bit too late. But yeah, we have 9.8% unemployed. That's what the government tells us, so it must be true. But except for the old, the young, job seekers, those not claiming allowances, sick or disabled, and the list goes on. I haven't written them all down there. There are far more than these that they do not include in our unemployment figures. And actually, if you keep printing money, what are you going to accept? A job that doesn't pay you enough to get there and back in petrol and feed yourself when you get there, or them handing you free money that's just as worthless as the money you would have earned if you got out of bed? They're just making the situation worse at the minute. There are currently 62 million people, 37 people of working age, of which 6 million don't work. So there's 31 million out of 62 million working. That's not 9.8% in my book. Okay, they look at it differently, but you only have to be above 20 to be into a Great Depression. I would still say we're on the wrong side of the line already, and we all know it's getting worse. I doubt anyone could put their hand up saying they don't know anyone who's lost a job yet. There's plenty of people, plenty of my friends. I know if I worked where I used to work, I'd have been fired by now. I know that. And insolvencies, and this only, you might know this because it came on the news yesterday, there were 135,089. So just to explain insolvency, if anyone ever said to you they've gone bankrupt, they're lying because a man cannot go bankrupt. A bank can go bankrupt, a company can go bankrupt, but a man goes insolvent. It's just a different way of saying it. So that's basically people who've had to declare, I can't afford anything anymore, take away what I've got now and just put me back onto benefits because I've got nothing. Okay? And if you take that figure, it's a nice figure, but if you divide that, that's 67 people an hour for every hour of every working day. That's more than 1 a minute for the entire working time of last year having to declare their own personal bankruptcy, their own insolvency. That's the highest figure. That's a really, really high figure. And I know that's not a huge percentage of the population, but it doesn't have to be. If you take it that those people are now declared insolvent, it means that all of the people that they owed money to have not been paid. And it also means that they're now being paid by the government because they can't afford to live. It all has a major knock-on effect. So you've got to see where our current economy is going.